Hello, everyone. I am Gui Valente, and this is the Valente Brothers podcast. We're here today with Pedro Valente.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
And Joaquim Valente.
Happy to be here.
So we're back again with one more episode. Thank you for all your support. Please always support us through sharing this episode with your friends, also liking our page on YouTube, turning on the notification bell. That all helps a lot. Today we're going to talk again about a very interesting topic in the world of martial arts in general, and it's also not different in the jiu-jitsu community. It goes way back, this conversation, and recently we posted a small article on our Facebook page, Valente Brothers Facebook page, and I think it had a lot of success. I think we opened up a very important discussion with some interesting points. And that conversation is the difference between sport, martial arts that are adapted for sport competitions, tournaments, jiu-jitsu for sports, and jiu-jitsu martial arts in general for self-defense. So I think it's a great topic. And Pedro, it might be a good idea to start out trying to identify or define jiu-jitsu and maybe sport jiu-jitsu, and so that we can start this conversation.
Yes, I'm very happy to revisit this topic because I think it's extremely relevant, and I think it still represents a huge source of confusion. Many people are not well informed about the history of jiu-jitsu and, as you said, the definition of jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu basically is a martial art. It's an art for battle, for combat. Martial means for war. And the genesis of jiu-jitsu occurs during the Japanese civil wars, an extremely violent period in Japanese history where the clans were fighting against each other. And out of necessity, these different styles of fighting were developed. Basically, as we understand human history and the human mind, fighting is instinctive, and it has been a part of human life from the beginning. Even the animals, as we always describe, have their own fighting systems. But in Japan specifically, they combine their native systems of grappling, of fighting, of wrestling, combined with striking, their fighting skills, with Chinese philosophy, with especially the Tao Te Ching, which talks about this idea of soft overcoming hard, of weaker defeating stronger. So that's the premise of jiu-jitsu, but its genesis is for combat with no rules, for survival. The objective of jiu-jitsu is for someone to survive a physical assault.
And what you just said about how, in connection with the Chinese philosophy, jiu-jitsu became known as this almost superpower, I think we can call it that allows somebody weaker to overcome someone stronger. That's very connected even with how jiu-jitsu spread around the world initially.
Yes, because if you look at especially the beginning of the 19th century, it started in the last few years of the 18th century, of the 19th century, of the 18th century. But as jiu-jitsu,
so hold on.
I mean,
yes.
It starts in the end of the 19th century,
yeah,
and then the beginning of the 20th century. That's when jiu-jitsu arrives in the West, right? And in the beginning, it was presented as what you said, a superpower.
And why?
It became a craze. It became something very popular around the world, especially with what was happening a few years later in world history. Japan, a very small island, defeated Russia.
Exactly.
And everyone was saying, how can that small island defeat that giant world power, the Russian Empire? And everyone attributed that, I mean, the Japanese attributed that, many jiu-jitsu practitioners attributed that to jiu-jitsu, not physical jiu-jitsu, but psychological jiu-jitsu.
Which is huge.
Strategical jiu-jitsu.
Correct, and it's all connected. But Joaquin, I think there's also an issue, before we talk about sport jiu-jitsu, I think you did a good job in talking about the essence behind jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu as a whole, but if we want to create this discussion when we talk about jiu-jitsu for self-defense. But I think there's an issue also. The word self-defense today associated to martial arts many times, and I think this happens more within martial artists, especially within the jiu-jitsu community, than the public in general. Because the public in general is very interested in self-defense.
Sure.
Self-defense is a powerful word. But why is it that among jiu-jitsu practitioners, you believe there is a prejudice when the word self-defense is used?
Ignorance, unfortunately. And many times it's not their fault. The exposure that they have had to self-defense is one that maybe I would have the same judgment towards self-defense, because it's limited, it lacks realistic resistance, and it lacks the enjoy of training that they find when they practice
The enjoyment.
the enjoyment that they practice when they practice sport jiu-jitsu. So that creates a disinterest and many times that the prejudice that you're basically describing. And I think that in the time that we live today, many times you see sport jiu-jitsu instructors being put in situations to teach self-defense because maybe it's an interest of a specific student. Many times women are looking for self-defense classes. And when you look at those classes, you see usually an adaptation and something that is not very practical to someone defending themselves in a real street situation. So, and that's why I respectfully say that it's ignorance, because every high-level sport jiu-jitsu competitor that has walked into our school and that has been exposed to the way that we practice self-defense, they have been highly interested in learning, in practicing, and even finding that enjoyment in the practice of the self-defense art. So that's the reason that I see.
I think you put it in a very eloquent way and very precise way.
And touched upon very important points. I think the enjoyment aspect is very important. I think the ignorance as to the realistic practice is another very important aspect. And
I would just add, Pedro, that when individuals in our community in martial arts refer to self-defense, they think, and Joaquin touched on it, but to make it very clear, they think of a practice that lacks, what you said, that lacks resistance. They think of maybe martial arts that through time decided to part ways with something that is essential for the development of your skills, which is resistance training. In martial arts, Japanese terminology, handori, or sparring. You need to be put in positions, of course, after you have the necessary skills. But once you have those skills need to be tested. You need to have the opportunity to fight with resistance so that you can adjust them, so that you can develop confidence.
And if I can add, many times people think of sparring as just an opportunity to be able to face resistance. But I think the most important thing is the opportunity for you to be dynamic, right? The art of improvisation, being able to find an angle that might shut down because the person is basically resisting that angle, and instead of meeting force with force, you yield and you find a better direction. And I feel that in self-defense, we apply that every time. As soon as the student starts developing, reflex, we start creating those scenarios where they're going to have to improvise and adapt to be able to survive and to be able to defend. And when we spar on the ground in what, is more similar to sport jiu-jitsu, we're doing that constantly. But as soon as those people, they try to practice self-defense, all of that gets eliminated. And it's a very monotonous and very, as I said, unrealistic practice. And that's why, based on that exposure that they have, they're ignorant to see how it can be dynamic and how you can have resistance training with a great development of that skill set.
Correct. Now, I think it's important for us to define very briefly. So what's the objective, Pedro, of learning jiu-jitsu for self-defense? For example, here at Valente Brothers.
Survival. Surviving.
Dealing with unpredictable situations,
Correct.
scenarios.
Yes, preparing people for the reality of an attack.
Dealing with
of a brutal attack that could be deadly.
Dealing with what's most common in a street attack.
Yes, in a very realistic way. And that's something that we learned from our teacher, Grandmaster Helio, who believed in realism.
But let's be very specific. For example, headlocks. They're not necessarily used in jiu-jitsu for competition. But we deal with that because headlocks are so common in a street fight.
Correct.
The possibility of punches, punching, striking in general is illegal in sport jiu-jitsu. But in a real street fight, that is usually one of the most common weapons that a layman will use. So you have to learn how to deal with it. And it's very important to understand that a layman attacks you quite differently than what you find in a typical jiu-jitsu sparring match. So practicing for that is very important. While sport jiu-jitsu, what is the objective when someone practices sport jiu-jitsu?
Competition, winning a tournament.
Even if they're doing it as a hobby, but the practice is done based on the rules that teach you how to overcome, how to win those matches, which are designed,
which involves points, right?
Points
and the interesting thing is to analyze the semantic drift that happened over time with the word jiu-jitsu, and that's where I think Joaquin hit the nail on the head when he used the word ignorance in a positive way. Ignorance to mean lack of knowledge. People today believe that jiu-jitsu is the sport. For example, when people come to our school and they observe a striking class, they might think that's not jiu-jitsu. Because in their minds, jiu-jitsu is a grappling sport. But that is not the original definition of jiu-jitsu. The original definition of jiu-jitsu is that it includes striking techniques and throwing techniques and grappling techniques. It's a complete fighting system, but today, most people believe that in order for you to be complete, you have to mix jiu-jitsu with other styles. So for example, I heard someone say the other day, well, jiu-jitsu is very good for self-defense. However, someone who trains jiu-jitsu also needs to learn Muay Thai so they learn how to throw an elbow. So you should complement jiu-jitsu with Muay Thai so they learn how to throw an elbow. The elbow strike is one of the classic jiu-jitsu techniques originally. But nowadays, jiu-jitsu, in the minds of most, has become a grappling sport where elbows are not part of the practice.
Because they don't see jiu-jitsu as a complete martial arts system the way we see.
Because they see it as a sport.
Now, was this the first time that this happened to the art?
No. It happened, actually, I believe, as far as we know, in a very documented way, through judo.
Exactly. And I think it's important to mention this because many times people think that this is, it's an attack in most of the jiu-jitsu schools that practice sport, and it's not. It's just to understand the difference and understand that the process of creating a sport will change the way that people train and the purpose of what people train for. And we saw that same shift happening with judo, as Guy was going to explain.
But with judo, let me just say this real quick. With judo, it was a little bit different because of the difference in the name. Even though originally judo...
The name was not changed because of that.
No, but I'm just saying it was easier. For example, I can show you judo books from the 60s where Japanese champion said, well, but jiu-jitsu is the self-defense art. Judo is the sport.
Yeah, you still have, I think, practitioners today that might say, even though it's very hard to find a name, they try to.
But when it's the
make
same
that
name, it's more
distinction.
difficult.
But I think what Joaquin said is exactly what happened. It has happened already in history.
Correct.
So,
But with jiu-jitsu being the same name, it presents a bigger challenge to explain.
Yes, but just to be precise, the point that I made was that when a sport is created and you start practicing that sport, you stop practicing jiu-jitsu as an art of self-defense. You're talking about the problem that we have today of definition. What I'm saying is the shift
yes.
that happened in the art.
I agree 100% with that. Do you feel that in any way I was contradicting what you said? Because I wasn't.
No, I'm just making it clear for all
Thank
our
you.
viewers.
Thank you.
Our audience.
Perfect.
So, with that said, let's continue trying to make this point very clear, because Joaquin touched on something very important, which is, for some reason, and I think it's more present here in America currently than even in Brazil. And I think there's a tendency, and we see that already, where slowly all practitioners are becoming more comfortable with their identity.
Correct.
Right? I think that's very important to understand exactly who we are versus who we think we are. That's an important practice usually, right? We've been talking a lot about it recently. And we're never trying to disrespect a sport jiu-jitsu practitioner by saying that sport jiu-jitsu is not ideal for self-defense, right?
We're not trying to disrespect. We say that because it's a fact.
It's a fact. It's based on objectives. Now, you'll have an argument, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's never too much. Well, but a sport jiu-jitsu fighter can beat up any attacker or can beat up any self-defense jiu-jitsu practitioner.
But now you're talking about the athlete, about the person.
I find this a very archaic
argument
that lacks intelligence and lacks
because
substance.
Or the other way is that, they show a lot of videos nowadays of people, sport jiu-jitsu practitioners, successfully using jiu-jitsu in street situations.
Yeah, just like judo practitioners.
And that's what I was
actually,
gonna
judo
say.
might even be
in rugby and
more
any
interesting.
contact sport
Yeah.
is going to give people
Wrestling.
better athleticism, and especially if it's a combat sport, it's going to give some tools that can be used. But that's not the point. To make that conversation very simple, I would like to ask, what's the most common, if you look at street fight videos today on YouTube, you can access so many different street fights. What's the number one, I want to call it a technique for lack of a better term, but what's the number one technique that is used in street fighting?
Aggression.
Yeah. What's the number one attack?
Punch.
Sucker punch. Does BJJ teach defending punches?
No.
So how can it be called self-defense? That's the end of the argument. You don't even address the most common situation. You go to a BJJ school, you don't learn how to block a punch.
What we have to do in this...
Most BJJ schools who train for sport, if somebody's teaching how to block a punch and you're
Which
teaching
we're going to get there.
self-defense...
Which we're going to get there.
Because that's what
both.
self-defense...
We're going to talk about trying to do both in a second.
But I don't want to talk about doing both. I'm just saying that...
No, I know,
because
but we
sometimes,
will.
And I want to. No, just because you're interrupting me when I was saying something that is not that.
Go ahead.
Because I felt like you were saying as if I was going to talk about it now, and I'm not. What I'm going to say is this. Some people say, I don't like self-defense. What does that even mean? You don't want to know how to block a punch?
No, what they mean is that they don't like what Joaquin explained, and we know this, and I'm just answering for you. They don't like that unrealistic practice that is dead.
But then what I'm trying to say
But
is
there
that
might
that's not
still be
self-defense.
some people that don't like even the realistic application.
I don't want to know how to block a punch. Okay, but that's not what they mean. I agree with you guys.
Yeah.
When they say...
No, some people say they'll never get into a street fight.
They're always
and
outliers.
and they like the sport, and that's totally fine.
Yes.
Yes, but
That's
that's not
okay.
what I'm saying. The point that I'm making right now is that which is the point that you made already, and I want to reaffirm it, is that when people say they don't like self-defense, and I'm not talking about the exceptions and the outliers, I'm talking about most people, when they say that, they're not saying that they don't like to know how to block a punch. They're saying that they don't like self-defense because they think self-defense training is unrealistic. And in many situations, they're right, because there's good self-defense, effective self-defense, and ineffective self-defense.
So let me just say this. So why is that? So I think we should now move on to the next topic within this discussion, which is what most schools have been attempting to do for quite some time. And we can talk about how this began, right, in the early days of sport jiu-jitsu, and how in the beginning everything was still very connected, but slowly, if we had a graph, or if we had an illustration to demonstrate this, the lines were very close when it first starts, self-defense and sport, but through time,
There was a specialization process.
There was a specialization process, which was very good for sport jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
And
it's what they call the evolution.
But slowly, as this line, as the progression happened over the years, sport jiu-jitsu, self-defense.
The more you specialize within the rules, the further you get from
Exactly.
self-defense.
And over time,
the lines separate.
Right? They separate more, to the point where a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners today are coming to that realization, which happened with judo already.
Yes.
They know that they're tough. They know that they might be ready for a fight. They also know many times, like, I never learned how to defend against a knife. We've heard this from, I'll run away from it, which we will run away if we can too. But that notion that
I'm not ready for that.
I'm not ready. That's not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm focused in becoming the best athlete in the world. I'm not focused on learning how to defend a punch. I don't care about that right now in my life. Just like a NBA player might not even have the time to dedicate himself to learning something completely new, right? That's why we get so many players that once they retire, right? So it's important to understand that. But Pedro, talk a little bit about that process, I think, from the beginning, briefly. What happened and your opinion on trying to do both.
Yeah, so in the beginning, I'm going to talk about jiu-jitsu in Brazil as we have before. I'm going to say it briefly. Jiu-jitsu was practiced as a complete fighting system. Kicks, punches, elbows, throws, grappling.
Even influences of other martial arts.
Defending against knife attacks. When Carlos Gracie, together with Donato Pires dos Reis, opened the first academy in Brazil in 1930, the newspaper article has a picture of Carlos Gracie and Donato demonstrating a knife defense with the wakigatame technique. So jiu-jitsu early on was a complete fighting system for survival, even though they promoted it through ring fights. In the 1950s, they opened a school that was also focused on self-defense. And when Carlson Gracie was trained by his uncle, it was a complete fighting system, learning striking, learning grappling, learning throwing. In the 1960s, with the creation of the federation, the jiu-jitsu that they practiced was complete. But they created a tournament practice, a sport with rules and a point system, most importantly, for them to be able to organize tournaments and to expand jiu-jitsu.
Trying to copy judo's success.
But with a set of rules that they believed would be more effective in preserving ground grappling.
And even some mentioned that maybe would be also effective in keeping a self-defense.
Correct.
Fighting.
That was their intent.
Positional
dominance on the ground and control and creating a hierarchy of positions where you progress when you're on top from the standing throw, past the guards, side mount, knee on belly, mount, take the back. So they tried to create something that was encouraging a path that was connected with self-defense. And in the beginning, when they competed, they practiced the jiu-jitsu that they knew within those rules. But with time, there was a process of specialization where they started to find better ways, easier ways to achieve points. And also ways to win without having to be concerned about strikes, as was the case before. So you adapt to a situation where striking is not a piece of the puzzle. And as that process continued by very competitive practitioners who were very effective in the way that they were practicing for the tournaments.
Exploiting the rules, which you should.
And so now you have a different style of grappling.
And let's just talk quickly about one of the, maybe the two, there are more, but what are two main rules that you think really contributed to this separation between survival and competition, tournament competition?
So, learning from Grandmaster Helio, we learned that the number one rule in fighting is never turn your back. Never turn your back. but
It's martial, no? It's
smart.
very
Never don't turn your
military.
back. If you're gonna die facing your opponent. Don't turn your back.
And
Standing up or on the ground.
And strategically, you need to see your enemy. You need to anticipate your enemy's
we don't have
attacks.
eyes on the back of our head.
Correct.
So
It's our radar.
Correct.
You lose your radar.
And so what happened is that they developed a rule that you get points for passing the guard. But from the back, you need to establish the hooks, meaning you need to mount. But when the person is facing up, you get points for the side mount for passing the guard. But when the person turtles, unless you put the hooks, you don't get the points. So that caused for practitioners, when they felt the guard was being passed, to avoid the points, to turtle, which didn't happen before.
Just like in wrestling and in judo.
Correct.
Which was a huge difference. When it first started, sport jiu-jitsu, that was still a huge difference.
Between judo
And jiu-jitsu.
like jiu-jitsu fighters don't turn their back, but today they do.
In the 1980s, you would not see jiu-jitsu fighters turning their back. Maybe a quick turn.
Yeah.
Maybe a rolling motion. Maybe
try to get the guard.
To try to get the guard or attack something for a second and immediately leave that position.
Yes, and we have many examples from back in the day when MMA rules were not so sophisticated. Fights in Japan where some fighters got brutally knocked out in the
where
turtle position.
the rules allowed knees and soccer kicks to the head.
Even though strikes to the spine were never allowed. Maybe in the first UFCs, but
talk
and then
to
the
us.
second one, because you asked for the main examples, the second one is the pickup, right? You're not allowed to slam from the guard, so you see all these people, practitioners, hanging in the guard and doing triangles,
Jumping guard and hanging.
yes, things that in the
Flying
streets,
arm locks, flying triangles, very dangerous. And then there's a cost benefit. I think, Joaquin, talk to us about the cost benefit. We call it effect in fighting. You might have a move like the flying arm lock, right? A beautiful technique. But when you're training on a mat, on a surface that will protect you, if it doesn't work, you land on your back. You might feel the impact, but there's a small chance that you're going to get knocked out. On the street, you could say, well, there's still a relatively small chance that I'm going to get knocked out if I choose this move or that move. But when it comes to survival, we like to really minimize that, right? So,
Yeah, I agree. I think everything we do is to try to mitigate risk. And when you use a move that is very risky, that goes against the idea of mitigating risk.
Yeah.
So every time that I choose to go for a move, I think it's interesting. I was doing this experiment the other day in the back room with some students, and we were practicing defending from the guard against someone who was just trying to knock you out. So we put gloves, actually light gloves, into one of the students' hands. We started in close guard, and he was basically standing up and just trying to punch you, and the person at the bottom had to defend. The students that focused on using their legs to be able to create distance and using the feet as weapons and really being aggressive with the legs to kick from there, the person who was trying to strike was very uncomfortable. They quickly disconnected and they had a very hard time trying to strike. The students that were trying to sweep, and with good sweeps that are even safer for a striking situation, those students were closer to getting hit. They were more uncomfortable. So naturally, offensive techniques are already going to create more risk. So within your offensive techniques, you got to pick the ones that are going to be mitigating risk as much as possible, the safest ones for you to use. And I think that in part of the strategy of learning how to defend yourself, the techniques have to communicate with each other. You have to be able to think, if this doesn't work, if this technique fails, what is my backup plan? And sometimes it's better to have a backup and a backup to the backup. And jiu-jitsu is so resourceful and you have so many tools that you have the chance to do that, as long as you're using techniques for the scenario and for the situation that you find yourself in. Today I was teaching a student also, and he got to side mount. I turned away from him. He wasn't mounted on shifted mount. So all he had was kind of like a wrist hold pin and securing there. But he's still on side mount. And he immediately pulled me into him on the bottom and he had my back. And I asked him, I said, in a real street life situation, are you always going to pull back? Because now if for some reason you can't quickly submit me from the back and I'm able to turn, you're in the bottom. And right now you were on top side. From top side, you have better situational awareness. From top side, you have the ability to stand up and kick me.
This concept, Joaquin, is so important. And we could expand it with so many different positions, right? For example, I remember Hélio Gracie talking about attacking a footlock from the top guard, right? Or from any top position where you're putting yourself now in the bottom to attack any lower extremity.
If it
doesn't work, you're in the bottom. So you just gave up positional advantage without knowing if that technique is going to work or not. Now, in sport, that's fine.
You know, not only it's fine, it might be necessary for you to win the fight because you might be losing by points.
Yeah. And even sometimes in practice, you might do it. But we still need to touch very briefly, because we're already over time, we need to talk about the difference. Again, going back to this fallacy about, oh no, but this guy is tough and he can do it. Remember, if you train jiu-jitsu without sparring, adequate sparring, of course, taking into consideration that the objective here is self-preservation and you don't want to cripple your body through jiu-jitsu. So understanding that is very important, right? But yes, you need to spar. We're not, when you say self-defense, repeating this again is important. We're not talking about just doing choreographed techniques. That's absolutely not what we are talking about and not what Hélio Gracie taught, right? But if we understand that, we also need to talk about the neuroscience process behind this, right? So if Pedro, you could expand a little bit on that, the reflex development side of this.
Yes, we can have very well thought out plans and strategies and ideas of how we're going to fight. Well, I practice this way, but in a fight I wouldn't do this. But the problem is that the way we fight is the way we train. And when we are in a fight under stress with the adrenaline rush, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible, the frontal lobe of the human brain, which is responsible for cognitive thought, practically shuts down. And we are relying on, in moments like these, we are relying on muscle memory, the amygdala, which is a different part of the brain, which is automatic. And we are not able to strategize. So the way we train is the way we fight.
So if every time somebody passes your guard, you turn to your knees to avoid the points, don't expect not to do that in a street fight.
Correct.
So if every time somebody picks you up trying to pass your guard,
when you're trying to do a triangle,
or even trying to just keep your closed guard, don't expect to have the reflex to be prepared to open. You won't.
You're going to get picked up because in a fraction of a second you won't be able to.
You're going to do whatever you're doing. So and that, I think, is also, just like you talked about the punch and the lack of that scenario in sport training, that is another very clear-cut reason why there is a difference.
When you're doing a deep half guard and keeping your face exposed, if that's something that you do all the time, most likely you're going to go for those moves.
And that's why there has to be synergy between your stand-up striking techniques, your throwing techniques, your ground fighting, your stand-up self-defense against surprise attacks. They all have to be in synergy and communicating in a way that you can go from one to the other.
Correct.
You see a lot of times people saying, well, but I practice sport jiu-jitsu on the ground. I practice wrestling for throwing. I practice, or judo for throwing. I practice Muay Thai or kickboxing for striking. So I'm covering all the areas. But the posture in your striking techniques is one completely different than when you're practicing your wrestling.
Yes.
And it's completely different when you're trying to defend against a headlock, because now none of those things are going to come into play.
Even in MMA, this is already, there are some very good coaches out there who are starting to
Now-
grasp and understand this and trying to create a uniform.
Between those aspects.
Yeah, among those.
Yeah.
But little do they know that Jiu-Jitsu has that.
Yes.
Jiu-Jitsu is a complete art that involves all those different characteristics in a way that they all talk to each other.
Yeah, Jiu-Jitsu is not MMA, it's IMA.
But now I agree with what Pedro said earlier about the problem with the name,
Of course.
because you say something that people hear it and they have a
Predefined.
And that's why, right? And also, let me just add this.
Don't forget the IMA.
I want to know about the IMA, and we need to separate the fighter from the technique.
Correct.
I think that's a huge problem. No, but I can do this, I can do that. Hold on. Let's be very, like Hélio Gracie used to say, let's prove things. Let's separate it.
Yeah.
And then I think we've said it a few times.
Show your technique and we'll show ours. Which one is best for the street?
Or let's bring the rugby, new
Example.
all black, or any rugby tough, and train him, and then get a layman, somebody who's never done any
dentist.
martial arts, a dentist who's just starting in martial arts, teach him, have the best sport instructor teach him, and then let's see who's going to win in a street fight. So, but that's, again, it's archaic. It doesn't help the discussion, and it makes absolutely no sense. And MMA came to actually, in a way,
It's
MMA
bravado,
helped.
right? It's
Yeah,
lack of
bravado.
sophistication.
But MMA
Intellectual
helped.
sophistication.
MMA helped a little bit, right, in this regard, because
Exposing many of the
exposing-
weaknesses of specialized martial arts,
Correct.
including karate, who only knows striking, including BJJ, who might only know grappling without the focus on striking.
and the success of many practitioners in MMA that came from a striking background and learned the ground techniques for
MMA.
striking scenarios.
That's a good point.
And they were very successful even against sport jiu-jitsu practitioners on the ground.
Now, in closing, and since we praised MMA, which the technical aspect of MMA we appreciate because it's very connected with the like you said, the genesis of our lineage of jiu-jitsu, not the genesis of jiu-jitsu as a whole. Of course, that was more for the battlefield. But since we did that, in closing, we have to just remind our friends, MMA is also not for self-defense.
And extremely limited as an example of self-defense.
It teaches you essential tools for
For
MMA,
self-defense.
for self-defense. But if you're practicing for MMA,
For self-defense.
if you're practicing for MMA, you're not talking about surprise attacks. You're not talking about weapons. You're not talking about multiple attackers. You're not talking about overall street awareness,
Which is the most important.
Avoiding
Awareness,
avoiding techniques, like
And
Joaquin
many
said,
times
risk mitigation,
Avoidance techniques. Yeah.
And
Avoidance.
I think especially in MMA, because in MMA there's only weight divisions, right? You see maybe the biggest and strongest triumph of jiu-jitsu, which is your ability to fight against someone bigger and stronger. And when you see those explosive techniques in MMA where people just suddenly get out and they, are able to do these amazing things that are nice to watch on TV, you got to ask yourself, would someone who is 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds less be able to do this?
Of course.
So.
Good. I'm trying to stay below the 40-minute mark. Thank you so much. We're going to, of course, touch on this topic again. So we'll see you very soon.
And please send us your comments, your
And
questions.
don't forget to comments, questions, like this video, and share it with your friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you.